We have with us today George Alifragis. He's the SVP at Metropolitan Partners Group. So George and I met, at a conference in New York a little less than 2 years back, like November, December 23, and was just fascinated by George's experience and background. He's a GTM operator with nearly 2 decades of experience scaling both private and public companies, and now like obviously a private investment firm SVP in New York City, NYC. Welcome, George, and super excited to have you today. And the topic is super exciting as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Karan. I'm
Yep,
thrilled to be here. And like we were saying, the world works in mysterious ways. So grateful that our paths connected and that we're having the conversation today.
absolutely. And the topic today is AI can't save a broken go-to-market. What founders must fix first, right? So basically saying, how would you describe the state of go-to-market today, especially for growth stage companies navigating AI, shifting buyer behavior, and tighter markets?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely experiencing interesting times. I would define the state of go-to-market today as actually the perfect storm. Um, and some founders and some executive teams are making it worse. Essentially, they're running towards the wrong solutions. And there's also a bit of shiny object syndrome, right? AI has become this shiny object, this distraction, and essentially distracting the teams from the real go-to-market problems. I see founders, CROs, CMOs spending 50K plus a year on sales tools, and when we look at their ICPs look completely wrong. So it's an interesting time. So definitely a perfect storm. And there's also this notion that the team and I have kind of framed as a little bit of the triple threat. So we see this AI hype. We're also seeing the buyer fatigue and extended sales cycles. And all of that, though, we can't forget that there's also now this new expectation of capital efficiency, and that isn't going anywhere. If anything, it's going to keep amplifying over time. We keep preaching and talking about capital efficient growth, and it's here to stay. So we're definitely experiencing all of those different elements today.
Sure. And so what are some of the, like you talked about some of this fatigue and capital efficiency gains not really happening. What are some of the other red flags or blind spots you've seen when teams rush to implement AI in their go-to-market motion today?
Um, a great question. The reality is that there's quite a few blind spots that we're seeing across a variety of industries, yet there's a few patterns that are bubbling up. So I think one is teams are kind of focused on chasing scale, but they're doing so even before achieving repeatability. And that oftentimes is a recipe for disaster. Companies are also trying to optimize systems, operating systems and procedures or engines that don't actually work. Um, we're also seeing some metrics theater. So, for example, this focus on measuring tool usage, tool adoption, instead of focusing on business outcomes. And I would say the one that keeps coming back over and over and over again is just this data inconsistency, dirty data, what I respectfully sometimes call data quality delusion. And that is really, I would say, at the core heated issues and blind spots that we're seeing. And there's just so much work that still needs to be done there. I remember, way back when I started my career quite a while ago, we were very much focused on selling and going to market with essentially a narrative around digital transformation. And really, this new era we're in is an evolution of that. We're still very much different companies at different stages are still very much on that journey of digital transformation. Yet the core tenets haven't necessarily changed, and data continues to be a huge part of that. So that would definitely be a few of the blind spots that we keep coming across.
Interesting. So a couple of key points is you're chasing scale without establishing PMF or repeatability, right? data is a big problem. That's what we keep saying. Like, if you have dirty data, garbage in, garbage out, AI is just going to amplify that, right?
Absolutely.
And Dale out here put a comment saying, by not putting a strategy together, they're actually creating inefficiencies,
Absolutely.
right?
That is so true.
So how do you? I mean, just on Dale's point, right? How do you put a strategy together today for AI in go to market?
So, I mean, that we could probably talk about for hours, and it really depends on the company, the stage, but there's a few common factors. So I think there needs to be this renewed focus on the go-to-market infrastructure and the fundamentals. And there's different layers to that, right? So the first layer that I'm not only passionate about, but it needs to be kept top of mind is market clarity, and that has to be part of your foundation. So really surgical ICP definition. Like we're not talking about high level understanding or somewhat know-how on the ICP. Your ICP today, it's no longer acceptable if you're not crystal clear and surgical on who they are, why they're buying, and why they should care. And that goes back to your earlier point around true PMF, but also traction validation, right?
Mhm.
So we really need to be able, as a collective, to establish that traction, and repeatability is what's also going to continue to reinforce that. One of the other things that I feel has worked across both public and private companies is really zeroing in on the buyer journey mapping, but then taking it a step further in terms of really mapping the end-to-end journey. And I know, this was a thing a few years ago, and unfortunately, it either got deprioritized or stopped being a thing, or maybe it's not as sexy. But that to me has always served our teams tremendously well. And I like to keep things simple but impactful. So really, the journey that you're looking for can be summarized, irrespective if you're B2C, B2B, across four stages. So think of it as you're buying. So your customers are, your acquisition stage and/or your buyers. Afterwards, it's the onboarding stage, which again is mission critical, because if you don't have that properly defined, the rest is going to feel the impact. Then the third stage is care, so taking care of your clients. And then last but not least is this emphasis on advocacy. So if you're able to really understand, document, define those four stages and be very surgical about it, you'll be able to leapfrog ahead in terms of the inefficiencies, in terms of the trajectory that you're looking to get on. And there's a few other layers. I think brand is having a huge comeback, which again, it should have never really gone away. In this new sea of sameness, brand is becoming really more important than ever. And you have to be intentional on how you build your brand equity, both internally and externally, your unique point of view, your strategic narrative. Focus on impact, I think, is now critical. There's just so much noise and there's just so much sameness out there, especially as folks are starting to use AI potentially for the wrong reasons, and or just generating a ton of the same type of content. That just doesn't resonate with buyers. We're still dealing with humans at the end of the day. It's human to human, and we're relatively smart, and we can immediately tell if something was intentionally created, drafted, if it was personalized for me, or if it just is mumbo jumbo, that whichever AI tool created. So that's really important. Then the last one I would say is, or two last ones, is really the focus on process repeatability, and really having a deep understanding on your unit economics. So those would be some of the key layers that I would recommend as part of the strategy, but more so your infrastructure, which goes hand in hand with your fundamentals.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Spoken like a investor advising their portfolio companies. It seems like you do it every day. Right? It becomes very obvious when you talk like that. But one thing on that, George, like which baffles us, and that's where we started Sprouts. Uh, Things like ICP. Any CRO, CMO, RevOps leader, what they solved, will talk about how that is one of the most important things, right? Yet, I haven't, or we haven't come across very many tools which are getting you details or getting a deep dive into ICP and helping companies have a deep look at that and helping them figure that out. Uh, it just baffles us, saying one of the most important problems. but probably one of the unsolved problems in the industry. Like any take from your side in terms of saying, how are companies figuring out ICP today? Are there tools which help with that? Because Sprouts definitely is going in that direction, right?
Interesting.
But like looking at all your CRM data, looking at all your website visitor data, outreach data, multiple other signals, and saying, hey, it's not just industries, geographies, revenue, and employees. What is the tech stack they're using? What is are they hiring for certain roles? What are the other signals you have? Like you can have hundreds of signals in your ICP at different levels.
Mhm.
Uh, why is there not enough focus on solving this problem when everyone says this is one of the most important things?
Um, Great question, and I think you hit the nail on the head. So it's if I'm being humble, I think it's a combination of it's probably not as sexy as something else, right? So it's not as sexy as some other playbook strategy, you name it. But ICP is absolutely mission critical. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And having, like I said, surgical ICP definition. And I mean, again, to be very transparent, even when I joined Met, we had, I would say, a relatively clear understanding of who our ICP was, but it was understood and communicated differently depending on the different groups, depending on the different personas. We also have, two very different audiences. We have our owner operators, our entrepreneurs that we serve and support, and we also, of course, serve and support our limited partners who invest in us. Um, but what I essentially prioritized when I joined is working alongside the rest of the team in really bring together a surgical ICP definition. We were trying to get onto one page, we got onto a page and a half, and that document has helped us tremendously because it's become a resource not only for our team, but it's also become a resource for our partners, for our operating experts who look to introduce us to different companies since we provide growth capital. And we had a ton of different materials, and yet this is the one document that we got resounding feedback on, whereby okay, now I finally get who you're looking for, at what stage, what problems you help them solve, what are different patterns. You really have to go deeper, and you can't really say that you're actually building the right go-to-market strategy if you haven't figured that part out yet. You're actually making a mistake if you are taking that path. And that's why I'm also baffled when we meet with different companies that are looking for growth capital, and we look to double click on this. 9 out of 10 times, it's still so high level, so generic. Sometimes it's incorrect relative to when we look at the data, when we look at the revenue segmentation, and then when we look at their go forward plan, there's just disconnects everywhere. So it's not even cohesive externally for investors who are looking to dive deeper. And again, we provide that fuel to the rocket ship. So I can only imagine, being an operator, how much inconsistency is happening internally. So think of the inefficiencies, right? And again, you need to solve for that. You need to prioritize that before prioritizing other things. And even if you think your ICP is where it needs to be today, I would probably take a bet that there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done. Um, we just see so many different opportunities across a variety of industries, and this pattern keeps coming back. So I think it's one of the key areas, must-haves, that just needs to be prioritized. There's no going around it.
Yep. And George, Dale is on fire today. He mentions companies treat ICP as a one-time exercise and do not
Mhm.
pressure test it enough. Like you said, we created this
That's so true.
document. And our thing is like saying, no, your ICP evolves. And it might not
Yep.
evolve in a day or a week, but if you look at 6 months or 12 months, 3 months, right? Like sometimes you're going after newer segments. Sometimes you figure out within your ICP, there are micro ICPs
Mhm.
saying, like you're a fintech company and you're like, I'm going after these industries and these players at these size. And you start realizing, oh, if they've had an M&A, they're more likely to buy.
Mhm.
Or if they're hiring for these roles, uh, the chance of them, because we automate these roles, a lot of companies do,
Mhm.
we can use that as a ICP trigger. So the moment you start adding those, it's almost a discovery process, which is ongoing, and all the intelligence can then lead to a sharper ICP dynamically, rather than it being a one-time two-page exercise and then revisit it 12 months later.
Absolutely. So you're spot on. I think Dale clearly is speaking from experience as an operator. It's an iterative process, and it's one where, as leaders, we have to keep challenging ourselves. We have to keep going back to it. And again, it's an iterative process. It's a learning process. Irrespective of the stage you're at, your ICP is going to evolve, and sometimes it evolves due to market shifts. Sometimes the playing field is evolving, and to your point, there could be new ICPs that are now emerging. And if you're not driving ownership around the surgical ICP and really making that an iterative process and making it a core tenet of your strategy, you're just heading in either too many different directions and in the wrong direction.
Right? So, Dale, yes, pressure test quarterly and tied to your buying persona and value prop. Completely agree with you there. Coming to some of the other things, right? And we'll jump into dirty data immediately after this. Karthi says 100% go back to fundamental people, process, and then technology. Uh, Another LinkedIn user said, George, 100%. In my experience, traction in the market is directly proportional to the investment in your brand, which I think
So true.
what we're hearing is with with technology becoming easier by the day using AI, right? At least one thing is getting established. AI has found some PMF in vibe coding. That's why you see all these massive rounds, Cursor and
Mhm.
Insurf and Lovable, Bolt, right? The list goes on. There's definitely PMF there. And so with technology building becoming easier, your distribution and your brand is going to be what separates you from the rest,
That's the moat.
right?
It's an unfortunate reality because again, I grew up in the TMT space and tech is near and dear to my heart, but the new reality is that technology is rarely your new moat. So if
Right.
you're still banking on that and you're not investing in your brand, you're not investing in really the not only PMF, but the message market fit in your strategic narrative, you unfortunately are going to just drown in the sea of sameness, and differentiation won't be there, and your buyers won't select you over others.
Yep. Coming to a topic which is near and dear to our heart, which is dirty data, right? Again, Dale quotes it as saying data quality dilution, right? And he
Mhm.
says, haha, but for you, right? Like, how does a dirty data ecosystem show up in go-to-market execution? What are the hidden costs that founders or CROs, CMOs typically underestimate? Uh, your CRM data is dirty, all your account signals, contact signals are dirty. I mean, we're in 2025 and email and phone numbers are still an unsolved problem. Uh, so just from your perspective, right? Like, how does this whole thing show up? But more importantly, like, what are the hidden costs that are underestimated?
So honestly, dirty data shows up every single day in go-to-market execution. There's a ton of hidden costs, but it's also what I think folks don't realize is that there's compounding effects. So a few things, right? So if we take a step back, though, again, that's why the fundamentals are so key. I still remember the days where every company was looking to be data driven. And now all of a sudden, every company wants to be AI native. You can't have one without the other. And the pursuit of being a data driven company is hard. It's not something you do overnight, and it's difficult. So I've been through it myself. You know, a number of us have been through it, and it's tough across public and private companies. The last company I was at, Strize, is a global tech company, and part of our moat was we would look to actually deliver data first digital transformations, and that helped us stand out tremendously vis-a-vis the IBMs, Cognizants of this world, et cetera, because we would always take a truly data first approach. But the reality was that it wasn't easier in the execution or deployment. It was actually a lot harder. But part of our thesis was if you don't address it and fix it upfront, what are you actually digitally transforming? And again, if we also think of the theme that we're just in a different chapter, digital transformation, if we look back at the data, which data never lies, I think it's anywhere from, unfortunately, 7 to 8 out of 10 digital transformation projects either failed or didn't deliver on expected outcomes. And the common pattern again is the lack of data integrity. And again, we need to stop kind of having this shiny object syndrome and wanting to skip these steps because it's costing us just a ton of money, a ton of resources. And that's where, even from our perspective, again, to be candid and to share, internal um, projects and priorities at a high level, of course, one of the first things that we prioritize when looking to really intentionally scale our operating network, we started with segmentation. Was it very sexy? Was it something that were like, groundbreaking? No, but it was an aha moment, but it was clear to the team that it was a must do and a must have. So segmentation is key. And then, relative to some of the hidden costs across sales, customer success, you name it, in sales, I see it all the time, and I've seen it before. Dirty data leads to qualification chaos. You have reps wasting time on the wrong opportunities due to a number of reasons, including bad scoring. So we're also on our end focusing on scoring. There's a ton of pipeline friction, and there's also pipeline fiction that takes place. Um, and if you think of the buyer experience, because for me, experience is paramount. Your end buyer is going to feel it, is going to end up feeling all of the parts of your business that are either not integrated, where the data is not flowing, where the data is wrong, and you're ultimately not going to be delivering the right experience. And then from a leadership perspective, which is why I call it pipeline fiction, you're forecasting based on inaccurate or incomplete data, or data that's just outdated. So it's again, it becomes this huge mess. And then from a customer success perspective, you you get this. You either get, unfortunately, hit on the head by churn that you said you didn't expect, you didn't predict properly, and that also at the root of it is data inconsistencies, is not understanding the key metrics that your customer is looking to solve for when leveraging your solution. The data can also be fragmented. You're not really correlating or helping them understand, my investment yielded the following, and or you're just tracking the wrong things. So there's a ton of costs on that front. And then to your earlier point, before I forget, um, the reality and going back to the perfect storm is that AI just amplifies all of this, right? So to your point, garbage in, garbage out, but now AI essentially does that at scale. So you need to approach this properly. Otherwise, you're actually going to dramatically increase the cost and impact.
Absolutely. And George, for the listeners, right? It's not just rediscussing this dirty data problem. Gartner revealed that 85% of all AI initiatives fail to deliver their promised value. Nearly 9 out of 10 companies are striking it out, and everyone is blaming AI. It's not good as it's not as good. It's crap. But the AI is working. The problem is your data is a mess,
Yeah,
right? Data is the lifeblood of AI, and
it
uh,
is.
and that's what
So
Gartner is saying. So, guys, you don't have to believe us. This is Gartner saying 85 to 90% of all AI initiatives fail because of messy data. Right? Like that's
I
the
believe it.
problem we're facing.
Mhm.
And to your point, right? Like if the data is messy, dirty, and you know, I'm part of Pavilion. We have the CRO roundtables, CMO roundtables. One of the biggest topics is dirty data, right? Everyone is grappling with it. Uh, how does one fix it? Like, there's a conversation to be had around a GTM data standard,
Mhm.
right? To make AI usable across sales, marketing, make it successful. So, any thoughts on how do we solve this problem? What should that data standard include? Uh, who should be accountable for owning this inside the org?
A lot of thoughts. So I think if I share one of our key priorities at the firm, again at a high level, we have a key initiative that is called the data lexicon framework.
Hmm.
And part of the thesis there is based on the notion that you can't automate what you can't define clearly.
Right.
So I love the notion of go to market data standard. I think that needs to become sexy. I think if we need messaging to make it sexy, then please let's do it. But it's absolutely critical. And part of that, again, will vary depending on the company type, company stage, and the industry. But there's different approaches. So kind of the potential takeaways could be you need to take the time as a team to identify the business critical data fields. So part of the secret or approach is you're not actually wanting to capture every single data point that exists. You
Right.
really need to understand, sort, filter, and score on what actual data do you really need to be reporting on, and what are you reporting on it for, and how is it then driving interoperability across the team. So there's obviously components of demographic data, behavioral data, but there's also contextual data that needs to be put in place. And this, merits a deep dive on its own. But we're also introducing this notion in partnership with the senior integrator on my team, which we're calling as AI ready fields. So you can't use AI on different parts of your data stack and or data architecture that have not yet kind of become AI ready. So those are the AI ready fields, and think of those as there's enough structured data and definition of the data whereby we can enable automation, and that is critical. And then through our data lexicon framework, we're also establishing the quality standards, right? And then linking that to really the AI enablement that can go with it. Um, and then one of the other things too that I think is uh, paramount that you touched on is we need to really distinguish for our company and for our teams, what AI can actually do versus what it can't do. And there's a gap there. So I think really where AI can help with this process is AI can help with pattern recognition. It can, for example, identify duplicates. It can identify outliers, formatting inconsistencies. AI is actually really good. Today's version of AI is really good at real-time enrichment, but you have to make sure you're working with the right partners on that, because there's a huge gap in variation in quality. And where AI can also help is in standardization and validation. So really, if there's messy inputs, how can we drive more consistent formats? Um, how can we leverage AI to flag data that doesn't match business rules, but you need to define those business rules? And that's really where AI can help. Um, but that being said, AI can't define the business context for you, and it shouldn't. Think of the generic mumbo jumbo it's going to actually define for you. It can't resolve any strategic conflicts, or again, if you're purely leveraging AI to define your strategy, you are going to keep contributing to that sea of sameness. So it's really critical to understand what AI can and cannot do, and you also have to be able to define that for your business.
We are almost on time. Uh, for founders watching this, right? What's the one action they can take this week or this month to start fixing what's broken in their go-to-market?
Um, so I think it goes back to a few things we said. I think there has to be this renewed focus on your fundamentals. There has to be a renewed focus on prioritizing your ICP. You need to really also make sure that you're implementing and mapping your go-to-market data standard, your data lexicon, aligning to the business relative to where it's at today versus where it wants to go tomorrow. Um, so I would say those are some of the practical steps. If you have put that in place already, amazing. You are, miles ahead. Um, I would say also just making sure that you are auditing your process. Um, Very critical there. You're not really going to drive automation or AI enabled anything if you're looking to amplify broken processes. That's not the way to go. And I would also say, making sure that you are as much as possible prioritizing your messaging, your brand, what you stand for, your point of view, the impact you're looking to make. Those are some of the concrete areas. And then there's a few, I would say, medium term areas that we've started to now embark on, which is this transition from SOP to ASOP, so AI-enabled standard operating procedures. But again, you need to be at the right stage of readiness to be able to do that. And also evolving from this notion of return on investment ROI, which I think, unfortunately, and again, kind of taking off the investor hat, for operational teams, it's too vague. So moving from ROI to return on data, and then also that will then allow you to actually be able to establish return on AI and return on automation. So moving from ROI to ROD, and then that is midterm.
Super interesting. No, thanks, George. This has been incredibly helpful. One last question: the data lexicon you talked about, uh, you implemented internally. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can't go too deep because just
Right?
because of the business we're in, it's one where a lot of things we build are proprietary.
Sure.
But what I can share at a high level, kind of double clicking on some of the nuggets, is it's really making sure that you are mapping the different parameters of data definitions, data standards across your different groups, and then also these internally and then externally. You're putting in place the right segmentation. You're implementing the right scoring relative to the data sets. And then that can also expand to different audiences, again, both internal and external. And then the other part, which I think is oftentimes misunderstood or forgotten, is we're putting a huge emphasis on interoperability. Um, and right now, not only is it critical for you to have your data where it needs to be in order to one day become AI enabled, AI native, or whatnot, you also need to drive as much interoperability as possible across the organization. And that's really what's going to allow you to be able to automate and systemize different processes and not have them just continue to work in silo, because we all know, again, as practitioners, how silos impact us and slow us down. So we're also putting a huge emphasis on interoperability health scores, and that's becoming a key priority across all department heads. So across all functions, it's not one where interoperability is not a one-way street, and that's another piece that I think has become key to that initiative.
Amazing. I think this is super helpful. Thanks, George. Love the discussion and look forward to continuing to be in touch. And we'll probably invite you over again sometime.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Karan. Thank you
Thanks.
for joining in.
Thanks, everyone.